Hey guys, let's talk about why mastering one programming language is better than being a generalist right now. I kind of have like a synopsis, right? So, jack of all trades developers are failing technical interviews because they lack the deep architectural intuition that only comes from obsessive specialization. We must expose why surface level syntax knowledge is a liability in a saturated market. True mastery means understanding memory management and concurrency deeply enough to solve problems generalists cannot even identify. So, what I mean by that is you're not learning the language and framework deep enough to really impress your interviewers. That's why I think having that core mastery over one language is really good, and one framework, maybe even two frameworks, depending on certain things. And maybe, if you want to go into full stacking, talk about like TypeScript and JavaScript, but let's just talk about it in general, right? So why learning more languages feels like progress, right? It kind of feels productive. You get new syntax, new frameworks, new tutorials that you're learning, right? It's kind of like a dopamine loop. I think in general for all developers, it's like, oh, I learned Python, now JavaScript, now Go. But reality is you're kind of restarting at beginner level every time. You're not really becoming really deep in knowledge and kind of surrounding yourself in a deep pool of experience in that language and framework. You're not stacking knowledge, you're kind of resetting it, right? And why this slows you down is you never really reach like debugging confidence or pattern recognition or real problem solving abilities. You rely on like tutorials, copy paste, and several like surface level fixes. Um, but it's kind of like the hidden cost. Those are like the hidden costs of being a generalist too early. I think as you move along in your career, you start becoming a generalist than specific. Earlier in your career, you kind of want to really delve deep into one language. So I think like a really good way of thinking it is like if I drop you into a broken code base, could you fix it, right? Would you open YouTube? So interviews kind of expose this. It's not about syntax necessarily. It's more about like thinking. So learning that specialized language, like these type of languages, or becoming specialized in, C sharp for me or SQL, these type of things really get exposed right away in interviews. And they're gonna beat you up about it. So like for me, I just interviewed for like a principal level and I got hammered about SQL for 30 to 40 minutes, but I know SQL really, really, really in depth. It's just a query language for databases, but I know like T SQL specifically really, really, really in depth. So I was able to sit here and talk about it and answer almost questions like on a specific of what they were asking me. So almost with flying colors, there's certain things that, I couldn't remember or fell through on. Or like if you went through like C sharp and specific like the job was for C sharp. So I was able to talk about like the difference between .NET framework and .NET Core, like the newer .NETs like 8.0 and up. Um, and the things that really go deep into fundamentals of that. So like if you stick with like C sharp, deep fundamentals, C sharp and .NET, these are like the things, right? It's object oriented programming, pillars, is built on that. It's type safe language. You learn that. Uh, so using like int and specific things, class or string. Let's see what else. Link, right? Like this is like very specific to C sharp. So being really good at that. Generics, async programming. So like async and await, core words that and how those interact with one another. And yeah, so that's kind of really the garbage collection C sharp, how it is, or like how you would handle garbage collection with like Java and those things. Like if you were into Java, I think knowing those really in depth and how they're working with the framework specifically, it's like .NET for C sharp really helps you out in that interviewing process. So let's talk about kind of what real progress looks like, right? What actually happens when you stick to one language. Like I said, you stop thinking about syntax. You know the syntax. You know how to print out this. You know how to do a for each loop. You know how to do a for loop. You know how to do a while loop. Those type of things don't really matter anymore. You can kind of just plug that away. You start thinking more about like the architecture, the trade offs of the language, or the trade offs of like how to do certain things. Like um, and data flow, right? And what you gain, like I said, is like debugging instincts, speed, and confidence in yourself with like the language that you choose. You know, if you're learning to code, you can choose whatever language and stick to it with that framework. Or, you know, if you have a job or you get hired for a job and you're kind of starting off on a newer language, you know, and learning those things. So you go from like, how do I write this to why does this work, right? Like, why do we follow this type of structure? Why does async in a way work so well together? Like, what are the benefits of that? So, um, you kind of like you begin to understand like what's happening under the hood of that language and that framework, why things break, how systems behave. uh, for an example, performance issues, you know, with C sharp, or like issues with like async and await, and why like those can be like not work well together. You know, asynchronous program, async and wait, enables high performance applications by allowing tasks to run in the background without blocking the main execution thread. So basically, like that's the benefit, but like what's the downside of this, right? Like there's definitely like bad things that can happen with asynchronous programming. For example, it becomes more confusing and stuff like that over, right? It's like another layer that you're adding on top of that main execution thread. Um, you get like the state bugs and API failures, right? Those are things that like you start learning more in depth with these languages and how to handle those. Like I said, performance, right? Garbage collection, casting, precision, understand how to convert between type casting, and the precision implications of using different numeric types like double versus decimal, right? Like certain things are more specific. Some things take up more memory to hold and stuff like that. Those type of things really start mattering when you are handling tons and tons of events, or you're doing like asynchronous calls and like that kind of stuff. So you don't want to get those memory leaks or whatever, right? Uh, so let's go on. I think as you kind of go throughout your career, though, um, generalizing is good. And second of all, you're just gonna learn these languages. Like, you know, you might be a C sharp developer, like I am specifically, but my company has another thing that handles like another application that's all written in Python, right? Like I've worked in Python in the past, but it's never been my like super strong language. But like I've worked in it, so they put me and they relied on me to start learning Python in this really specific framework that this company uses for Python. But I know how to go through and debug and do all those type of things, right? So, but I'm not as comfortable as you know going through C sharp right now, C sharp, or you know having cursor like pop me up a function and making sure that thing is working correctly. I can't do it as fast as I can with C sharp when I'm working in Python. But that is why generalizing does matter. Sometimes there's going to be projects that come up or companies that you work for to where you're going to start learning more and more and more, but you're always going to have your core language, like for me, C sharp, right? I think that's why it's really good. So I think generalist, later in your career, it is really good. And once you have depth somewhere, it is really good to start doing that. I think generalists that start learning like you know more languages, you know, for example, if you're going to start in the back end with Python and then you want to start learning like front end stuff, JavaScript, and becoming more generalist in these type of languages, is really good because you start opening your career path to being able to do front end projects and stuff like that. So I think generalists win later, but specialists win first. So if you're really like beginning start, or you're like in your mid level, you know, or lower, um, just becoming a specialist in those type of things in that language and that framework really, really sets you apart and kind of accelerates you And then as you go through the years and through the job, you start learning more technologies and are required to more languages and frameworks. That's kind of where the generalist starts spreading out. And I think that's where it starts helping you as a developer, as far as, interviews, getting jobs, your value as a developer monetarily, how much you should be compensated, and those things like that. But I think even um, when you become really deep in a language and a framework and an ecosystem, that you gain a lot of value. That's how you're gaining like your big jumps in value to these employers, right? So I think when you're starting, be a specialist and get very deep into learning that framework and language, whatever it is. If you're learning from the beginning, your Python, learn Django, Flask, um, whatever, NumPy, PyTorch. If you want a feature proof language, Python is great. Rust, TypeScript, whatever you want to do, right? There's tons of stuff. They're highly supported languages. If you want to become, you know, performance engineering, C++ and Rust are amazing. If you want to go in the Microsoft tech stack, C Sharp, there's tons of good jobs out there. Java's still good. I don't care what people say. There's tons of Java jobs like in the banking industries and stuff like that. So, yeah, just really hamper down on what language you're using, what framework it uses, what database gets used really well. So, like SQL Server works really well with C Sharp because it's Microsoft, right? And it's always going to be around. It's supported by Microsoft. It's a major company. Cloud development, you got Microsoft Azure. So if you're learning that, you would learn your next levels. You're going to be learning cloud computing. So you're going to start learning like Azure DevOps, Azure repos. Your IDE is probably going to become Visual Studio Code or Visual Studio, right? And learning those things. And then you can start branching out into Docker. But see, there's like how it works is like if you specialize in, I'll just keep talking about C Sharp because that's kind of my specialization. C Sharp was where I started. Like that's the first place where I began my depth, right? I took one step in, and then I started my second step into the deeper water was learning SQL Server, learning T-SQL and stuff like that, how stored procedures work and stuff. And then my next step was learning the cloud development portion, right? So Azure, a lot of my jobs use Azure nowadays, right? And Docker and Kubernetes, right? Like those are like your next 2 or 3 steps into the development depth, right? And as you go, you start gaining this knowledge. And now that you've worked in Azure for 3 or 4 years, well, you have a pretty easy time heading over into AWS or Google Cloud, right? Like these major cloud development. That's kind of what I'm trying to say is since you have your backbone built out, your skeletal system, you can put a little muscle on and learn in these other languages. Um, and web frameworks kind of work the same way. If you learn React, you're gonna have a pretty easy time learning Vue. Um, Angular's a little different in my opinion, but yeah, it's the same thing. You know what I mean? You learn IDE, you know, Git and stuff like that. You can hop and not IDEs differently. I don't think the rest of this really matters. But yeah, I think that's kind of why you specialize in something. Your first couple of years, you're really going to set yourself apart in the interviews. You can sound way more intelligent. You're going to know way more. And then you can start providing yourself more general knowledge. Like, oh, if I want to learn a second language, oh, I know C Sharp. I want to go learn Python. Picking up Python was super easy for me right away because, it's easier, quote unquote. But right. Um, so then I can start learning, like I said, my next step into the Python world ecosystem or world was going to be, what framework to use with Python. So for me, at first it was Django, and then I started learning Flask and Fast API and other libraries. Right, Python's super super vast, like pool. Like every language is just vast. There's tons that go with it. What database goes really good with Python, right? So SQLite kind of gets plugged in a lot with Python. Like I think if I remember correctly, like when you build out a Django application, it kind of gets installed. Maybe I'm wrong. It's been forever, but yeah. So I think as your years go on, you're gonna start learning these frameworks because your company needs it, or you just want to build something out in that language and framework and teach yourself these things. But that general skeletal muscle system, you start building more and more as a developer. So that's why generalists kind of win later in your career, but a specialist from year zero or college to, or even hobby programmer to mid-career level professional developer, specialization I think wins every time. So that's just my opinion. Take it or leave it, but yep, have fun.